Well, joining us now is Daniel Levy, a former Israeli negotiator who's currently the president of the US Middle East Project and joins us from London. Mr. Levy, always good to have you on Al Jazeera. 30 years on from the Accords, in your opinion, sort of being at the heart of trying to implement the policy, was it ever going to work?
Very good question, Suhail. I think it's impossible to know the intentions of the actors at the time. I think the major question was that with the Palestinian national movement having crossed the Rubicon, there was the opportunity for Israel to achieve something which would have been a remarkably good deal for Israel. I think questionable whether that was true for the Palestinians, certainly not for refugees. Was this going to prove to be a tactical move by Israel to reorganize the terms of occupation and entrench, or would it mark a strategic reorientation of Zionism towards acceptance of Palestinians? The proof is now in 30 years later, of course, Suhail, that this proved tactical and Israel has entrenched. And that has been true of every government. The current government, we're right to talk about its extremism, that it is pushing for a second Nakba, but no government managed to make that switch. And so we see that the system in Israel was hardwired not to accept Palestinian rights.
In terms of it's always interesting, isn't it, to look retrospectively back at history. I mean, was there any real sincerity to find a way to peace? The internal squabbling between Israeli politicians is always there. It was there. Yitzhak Rabin and Shimon Peres didn't always see eye to eye. That's no secret. But was that a distraction from that potential solution and that missed opportunity, certainly for Israeli politicians?
Look, I think we make a mistake if we focus too much on the personal and we don't think about the structural.
But it is the personal, Daniel, isn't it? A case that, the structural is created by the personal. It takes those personalities in the public domain, in the political domain, to make those decisions, and inevitably that's going to happen.
Well, there's of course something to that, and I think it's right. Leaders really matter. But it would have taken a real shift, a shift conceptually. Remember, Israel is established off the back of the Nakba, of the dispossession. The Palestinian citizens of Israel live for the first 18 years, not just the Palestinians who can't return, but those inside the new Israel live under a military government. The occupation that begins in 1967 is deepened. So what would have needed to happen would not be an Israeli negotiating position which says, OK, you've recognized 1967. Now, how can we negotiate you back further? How can we steal more land? How can we make sure that the refugees don't get compensation, let alone return or restitution? How can we nickel and dime you on Jerusalem? It would have had to have taken an Israeli position that says, you've made that historical change. We now, too, will make that historical change. They didn't do that. And the second thing it would have required, because you're absolutely right, people matter, but people do not operate in an isolated environment. And the internal debates inside Israel do not happen in isolation. They happen in a broader context. And this is the huge second point to make, Suhail, because what was the role of the outside? Remember, the geopolitical moment was American unipolarity after the Cold War. For this to work, the Israeli body politic would have had to have been confronted by a firm demand that we don't really care what Shimon this and Yitzhak that and Benjamin the other think about each other. You will have a price to pay if you don't do this. You will be held accountable. That never happened. America never played the role it was supposed to. 30 years later, the geopolitics have changed, and therefore our analysis has to change, that America will not deliver this. To continue running back to Washington as the savior is a fundamental misreading of the geopolitical map, and that needs to change in how we think about these things.
I think it has changed, certainly from the Palestinian perspective. I mean, you come to maybe my last question here, and a relevant one. The men at the centre of the Oslo Accords, Arafat, Rabin, Peres, have all passed away now. Is there anyone on either side and either end of the political spectrum that you might say could pick up from where they left off? I mean, the phrase is, isn't it, if there's a will, there's a way.
I would say to you, show me the context in which they are operating, and I will tell you whether the individuals can emerge. So if Israel is operating with total impunity, I can promise you no such individual will emerge. If the Palestinians are divided and are acting in the Palestinian Authority, 30 years later, the PA has become the subcontractor. If you don't have the structures that can advance a strategy for liberation, then you will not see a Palestinian leader, not who can make the compromises, but who can challenge the status quo in a way that will really change things. And do we even want to return to an attempt which couldn't really deliver equality and historic justice? Should we be looking for something better than what Oslo offered at the time?
Let's see what we can find and look for in the future, perhaps. For the moment, Daniel Levy, thank you so much for joining us from London. Let's wrap all of this up now with... Thank you.